Okay, chapter 1 is called Reality Check. If you take a walk on a sunny day, any number of beautiful things might attract your attention. The blue sky, beautiful flowers, green leaves on trees, or the fresh smell of nature adding fragrance and oxygen to the air. This is the world we perceive with our 5 senses, and our conscious mind identifies it as the reality in which we live. As we age, what we see, smell, hear, and taste comprises more of the real world, as we are taught in school that things outside our physical existence and beyond the extension of science don't exist. When we touch the ground, throw a stone, or bump our elbows on furniture, it certainly feels solid. Who in their right mind would say it isn't? Most of us are shocked to learn that what we interpret as our physical reality is not what it appears to be. There is actually a great deal of space between the atoms that compose matter. Although everything we touch feels quite solid to us, it isn't. Observations made using only one's physical senses can be very deceiving. For example, during the early Renaissance, the greatest minds would have staked their reputation on the fact that Earth was stationary in space. The sun, moon, and stars circled our planet. Really, who could argue this point? When people looked up at the sky, they saw celestial objects rising in the east and setting in the west, and there was no sense of motion, rotation on terra firma. The geocentric or Earth-centered theory was the logical train of thought explaining this movement because it was supported by visual observations made daily and nightly. These Renaissance-era scientists made the mistake at arriving at their conclusions about movements on the celestial sphere based only on their sense of sight. Not a very good tool for judging reality. The people who supported the geocentric idea, including the astronomer Ptolemy, were considered the greatest minds of their day. However, just being intelligent and well-educated doesn't guarantee that one will never be wrong. For a very long time in history, anyone who contradicted the geocentric model was laughed at and called a heretic, fool, or troublemaker. The revolutionary thinkers who opposed this idea were ridiculed, jailed, or sometimes even put to death for insisting that our Earth circled the sun and not vice versa. Today, we know these heretics and fools were correct. The question of physicality concerning matter may seem like a wild claim, but it was scientifically proven at the beginning of the 20th century by Dr. Ernest Rutherford and 2 assistants. Today it's known as the Geiger-Marsden experiment, or sometimes the gold foil experiment. This experiment was performed by Hans Geiger and Ernest Marsden in 1909 under the direction of Ernest Rutherford at the Physical Laboratories of the University of Manchester, England. Rutherford's team measured the deflection of alpha particles, particles that have an atomic mass of 4, consisting of 2 protons and neutrons, carrying a +2 positive charge. Using a controlled radioactive source, the scientists directed the particles to strike a sheet of very thin gold foil. They observed that a very small percentage of particles were deflected through the dense gold foil, and some were even scattered back towards the source. However, most of the particles passed through the metal sheet without hitting any gold matter at all. From this observation, Rutherford concluded that the physical space between atoms was much greater than anyone had previously thought. Although the gold metal appeared solid, it was mostly empty space. Rutherford and his associates were astonished to find that only 1 in 9,000 particles were reflected by the gold sheet, and the rest passed through it as if nothing was there. This result was completely unpredicted, prompting Rutherford to later comment, "It was almost as incredible as if you fired a 15-inch shell at a piece of tissue paper and it came back and hit you." In 1911, Dr. Rutherford published an analysis of his by then famous experiment, and its results shocked the physics and chemistry communities. His observations indicated that a model of the atom with a diffuse charge was incorrect. Actually, a large amount of atomic charge was concentrated at a very small point, giving it a very strong electric field. He concluded that an atom is mostly empty space, and that most of an atom's mass and a large fraction of one of its 2 kinds of charge are concentrated in a tiny centre. To give you a clearer idea of this theory, imagine we expand the nucleus of the atom to the size of a penny. We place a penny in the middle of Giant Stadium in New York. The first level of electrons would be in the top bleachers, while the next closest atom would be about 1,200 feet from the penny centre. The apparent solidity of a substance is a result of strong electrical bonds between electrons and their nuclei. Despite their distance from the nucleus, the negatively charged electrons are held strongly in place by their attraction to the protons in the atom's centre. This attraction creates a great deal of structural integrity and a strong force that repels the electrons of other atoms. To explain this principle, imagine a fan that has been unplugged. Its blades aren't moving. Looking at the fan, we see there are 3 blades, and the space between the blades is large enough for us to stick our fingers or perhaps our whole hands through, from front to back. We plug in the fan, turn the power on, and set the control to maximum speed. The fan blades now appear as one solid object. If we attempt to stick a pencil through the blades, the pencil will be deflected, as if hitting a solid wall. We benefit from this repellent force every day. Despite the empty spaces that exist in every atom, when we lean on a tabletop, our hands cannot pass through the wood or metal in that surface because the electrical fields of the electron clouds in the table and our hands repel each other. This gives the impression, illusion, or whatever you wish to call it, that matter is very solid. In reality, it isn't. Now that we have uncovered the fact that our perception of living in a physically solid world of matter is nothing more than the repulsion of electrical fields, the concept of other dimensions where intelligent beings other than humans exist seems easier to accept. In order to understand the Djinn and their location in time and space, you must be ready to perceive the multiverse beyond the range of your physical senses. You must explore it with your mind. The Djinn homeland. The word Djinn in Arabic means unseen or hidden. We don't know what they call themselves, but this is the name given in Middle Eastern mythology and in the Quran. It suits them well, for they are hidden from our view. The word Djinn can be used to identify any non-physical being that exists in another reality. But we believe the Middle East used the term to describe a particular type of entity that exists between the multiverse, multiple universes, of matter and energy. The Djinn exist in a dimension close to our own, and they seem to have the ability to interact with certain people who live here when it suits their purpose. To some, this idea of other dimensions and parallel universes may seem like metaphysical or New Age nonsense, but the idea is quickly becoming accepted in 21st century physics circles. A new theory called string theory supports a structure of multidimensional universe and simply states that the smallest units of matter are not point particles but two-dimensional vibrating strings. The vibration of string determines if a particle will become a proton, neutron or electron. By adding or taking energy away from a vibrating string, one particle can change into another. Thus a proton can become an electron if its vibration changes. The actual energy used to vibrate each string is thought to originate from a parallel universe. Strings can be closed or open, supporting the belief that there are at least 10 dimensions in our universe. An aspect of string theory called the membrane, or M theory, states that all vibrating strings are attached to a membrane or fabric that acts as a giant web, tying all the forces of the universe together. Scientists know these membranes as brains, B-R-A-N-E-S, the stuff that makes up space and time. The theoretical existence of brains has expanded string theory to 11 dimensions. It is theorized that entire universes are attached to brains in a multidimensional fashion. In the multiverse, there are an infinite number of brains, each with its own particles and in some different physical laws. Brains allow for an entirely new set of possibilities in multiverse physics because particles confined to the brain would look more or less as they would in a three-dimensional universe and could never venture beyond it. Protons, electrons, neutrons, quarks, and all sorts of fundamental particles could be stuck on the brain like water drops on a shower curtain. However, the mechanisms that make the fundamental particles stick to the brain of our universe do not apply to gravity. Gravity, according to the theory of general relativity, must exist in the full geometry of space. The graviton, the particle of gravity, is thought to be created by a closed vibrating string, thus also encompassing the full geometry of all the theoretical extra dimensions and parallel universes. String theory can also be used to explain why the graviton is not stuck to any brain. Open strings are like hooks attached to a curtain. The graviton is associated with the closed string, and only open strings can be anchored to a brain. The evidence for these extra dimensions and other universes is in fact shown to us in gravity's weakness. Gravity should be a very strong force in our universe, but it isn't. The waves of gravitons filtering through other dimensions and brains of parallel universes weaken the effects of gravity in our reality. The effect is much like feeling the heat from the electric heater. If you are directly in front of the heater, you feel very warm. But if you place barriers or distance between yourself and the heater, the total amount of infrared radiation reaching you is greatly diminished. When we consider the many variations of string theory, it is easier to accept the idea that Djinn exist in another dimension rather than their own in the multiverse. It's here they would definitely live up to their hidden nature. This race of beings would be invisible to us in our spatial plane of reality. Also, many theoretical physicists from well-respected institutions of advanced learning, such as Carnegie Mellon University, the University of California, San Diego, and the University of Texas, Austin, are open to the possibility that these other realities may be inhabited by living beings. So far, we have used terminology like parallel universes and dimensions, but there are many people in the 21st century who can't differentiate between the two. In addition, the multitude of scientific papers that have been published on the subject seems to indicate that some authors are unclear if the two terms mean different things or are one and the same. A dimension is a spatial coordinate. We live in the third dimension with an X, Y, and Z axis. The fourth dimension is time, often considered to be the past, present, and future, existing in the same place, but at a different frequency, so to speak. This has made our view of this dimension more nebulous than it really is. The fourth dimension is the spatial parity within our own physical universe, and is not on any other brain in the multiverse. In our physical universe are 6 additional dimensions, each existing at angles we cannot turn to see it or enter. It has been theorized that these extra dimensions are folded around our reality and are nothing more than tiny pockets, perhaps no larger than the nucleus of an atom. If you were Djinn, this would be a good place to hide, but it's hardly enough space to harbour an entire race of beings. However, we must consider the fact that according to legends, the Djinn are not physical beings, but are composed of smokeless fire. Such a phenomenon is a lot like plasma, the fourth state of matter. Although many schools still teach that there are only 3 states of matter, there are actually 4. To put it simply, plasma is an ionized gas into which sufficient energy is provided, freeing electrons from atoms or molecules and allowing charged atoms and electrons to coexist. This strange fourth state of matter is actually the most common in the universe. Our sun is made of plasma, as is lightning. A plasmic creature, then, would require very little physical space to exist. Many physicists are beginning to believe that these extra dimensions are actually quite large, an idea supported by the apparent weakness of the gravitational force. As mentioned earlier, gravitons may be filtered through other dimensions and parallel universes. If these other realities were small, gravity would have no effect. The gravitational force's weakness actually supports the theory that these extra dimensions comprise a considerable amount of physical space. The 11th dimension is thought to be the brain on which we exist. The brain of our universe is all around us, and the elementary particles that make up your body are attached to it. So why can't you see it? Mainly because you're part of it, and it moves when you do. It has been calculated that the brain of our universe is somewhere in the order of several hundred trillionths of a millimetre in proximity to you. Scientists sometimes identify the brain our universe exists on and all other brains in the multiverse as parallel universes. Think of the brain as the 11th dimension rather than a parallel universe, since it is in the intricate web that binds our universe together. All the planets, stars, galaxies and extra dimensions we see in our universe, in addition to all the electromagnetic energy, belong to this brain, and their existence depends upon it. A parallel universe is another brain with galaxies, stars and perhaps 10 or more dimensions. Some of these brains may be larger than our own, and some may be smaller. Some are far from us in space and time, while others are very close and could interact with our brain. When the brains have a close encounter, two things can happen theoretically. The first possibility, if the brains pass closely and interact at a dimensional level, wormholes or tunnels could form, connecting the two parallel universes together at multiple points for an unpredictable period of time. This might allow matter from one universe to flow into the other. If there are intelligent beings that have developed a technology in at least one of these parallel universes, they might send ships or devices through the wormhole to explore the other universe. The second possibility, brains may smash into each other, causing both universes to be disrupted, turning all matter into nothing more than vibrating strings of energy. A controversial theory in physics states that all matter, if broken apart, will retain its information. Stephen Hawking, The Hawking Paradox, on the Discovery Channel, 2005. This means that after a period of time, both brains and all the material contained within them might form one new giant universe or a number of smaller ones. Elementary particles will eventually form, then galaxies, stars and perhaps living beings once again. Then where are the jinn? According to many of the Arabian stories and Islamic texts, the jinn live in a place that is very close but invisible to humans. Given this information, they may exist in another dimension, perhaps somewhere between dimensions 5 through to 10. If the dimensions are numbered according to their proximity, then the most logical candidate would be 5. The ancient people of the Middle East knew the jinn coexisted with our world, but in a place no man or woman could ever visit. This is one of the reasons why jinn were said to live in desolate caves, deserts, forests, mountaintops, graveyards, and even in the deepest depths of the sea. These areas were considered the jinn's hiding places, where humans very rarely ventured. The cultures that proposed these possible hiding places did so more than 1,000 years ago, when people had no idea of the concept of other dimensions. Most would have shuddered to think that jinn could be hidden right next to you, perhaps in your bedroom as you sleep. Some Islamic households accepted the fact that jinn could exist on one's property or home and remain invisible. It was thought that when these jinn chose to show themselves, they would appear in the form of a snake or their favourite, a black dog or cat. According to the 13th century Muslim scholar Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, the jinn can take the form of any human or animal. When a jinni takes on a physical form, it is much more vulnerable, but still very hard to kill. For this reason, the jinn do not keep physical forms for very long, but will shapeshift into hideous monster-like animals to frighten people or keep them away from what they consider their own property. Ancient stones. Centred in New York's Hudson River Valley are a series of mysterious stone chambers and carved standing megaliths that have perplexed researchers of the paranormal and archaeological for decades. We have studied the chambers for more than 20 years and believe they are evidence that the east coast of North America was explored by people from Europe centuries before Columbus. The ancient people who constructed these chambers may have been druids who came to the New World in search of a gateway to the world of the gods. The paranormal and UFO phenomena associated with these stone chambers today suggest that they may have been used as markers to the world of the Jinn. During a recent field exploration of a stone chamber located in Vanishstock State Park, a black dog joined us as we trekked through the woods. The dog seemed to have appeared out of nowhere and followed us the entire time. Although it appeared friendly, most of the people with us on this trip commented on how strangely the dog behaved. It followed us very closely, as if keeping an eye on us. We joked amongst ourselves about the Jinn connection. At the time, we didn't really take it seriously, but thinking back on the day, who knows for sure? If the Jinn exist in a nearby dimension, it would stand to reason that the two realities must interact from time to time, giving us a view of their world and them a view of ours. However, because humans are three-dimensional, physical beings, we may only get a partial view of the Jinn world. Instead of seeing detail, we might only see shadows, two-dimensional lines or vague orbs of light. Since the Jinn live in a higher dimension, perhaps a fifth, they should be able to perceive all dimensions below them, much like we humans can interact with the three dimensions in our space. A belief that predates Islam states that the Jinn can see us, but we cannot see them. The only time we're able to catch glimpses of them is when they allow it. Many people may find this thought somewhat unsettling, but it may be true. Have you ever been outside or in a dark basement or even in your bedroom at night and gotten the feeling that you were not alone, that someone or something was watching you? Most people brush off the feeling and go about with their business or fall back to sleep, but your inner voice and feelings may be telling you that a Jinn is watching. The Jinni is in the same space, perhaps alongside of you, but in a higher dimension. As a Jinni presses against the membrane that divides the dimensions, it may appear as a shadow image or a ghost-like apparition. It is the Islamic belief that sightings of phantoms and reports of hauntings are the result of Jinn interacting with our reality. Although the idea of Jinn closely observing us may seem ridiculous to the paranormal investigators who research haunted places, it must be considered nevertheless. We must also take into account that only certain Jinn may have the ability to peer into our world when near geographic locations where their reality crosses ours. We believe their restricted entry points could account for the number of locations around the world that are considered as paranormal hotspots. Some of these may include Sedona, Arizona, the Bermuda Triangle, the Hudson Valley of New York, and the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts, just to name a few. The Jinn world is very complex and may also be the home of a number of other living creatures. According to Turkish mythology, the Jinn, known there as Sin, C-I-N-N, have a variety of pets. The pets are said to be much different than our cats and dogs, and are described as horrible monsters you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley. Perhaps the sightings of strange creatures throughout time are nothing more than a Jinni's stray pet. Since the home of the Jinn is beyond the fourth dimension, time in this other reality is most likely different from ours. 1,000 years in our world may be only a year there. Whether the Jinn can enter the fourth dimension and travel back and forth in time is also unknown, but they are reportedly able to tell the future. On the other hand, other accounts say the Jinn cannot really tell the future, they only appear to have this ability. Some of the more powerful Jinn receive their gift of prophecy by travelling to the higher realms and eavesdropping on the angels who occasionally meet to discuss future plans for humanity on planet Earth. The concept of the Jinn and all these extra dimensions and parallel universes opens up a great number of possibilities for paranormal investigators. To fully understand the hidden secrets of the multiverse and the world of the Jinn, we must change our view of reality and open our minds to new possibilities. Our thinking must no longer be rigid and two-dimensional. Rather, we must take our conscious minds beyond the confines of the physical body and use our deeper inner intelligence to help us perceive and understand what our five senses cannot. When we are able to achieve this, we will learn more about not only our own reality, but also that of the Jinn.